Hello, everyone. I wanted to get online tonight to talk about a topic that I have been dying to discuss, which is the avoidance of anxious attachers. And to be very clear, I am not talking about fearful avoidance. I am not talking about how some of us can have a period of avoidancy when we've been broken up with. No, today, this is going to be a bit of an advanced topic. I'm going to be discussing the fear of commitment that anxious attachers have and spinning the conversation away from the avoidant attachers. They've had enough love and care from me to talk more about ways in which we as anxious attachers can get in our own way for true love and happiness. This is going to be a bit of a discussion piece that I'm going to talk about from my phone because I've written down some points that I want to cover. And it's really looking at the ways in which we as anxious attachers can be bloody emotionally unavailable to ourselves and by virtue to our future as well. If you have any questions for me, feel free to leave them in the question mark box below. If I have time, I will get round to it. I also want to say, trigger warning, the stuff that I'm about to cover in this particular live is advanced stuff for the average anxious attacher. There's probably going to be a lot of resistance. There's probably going to be a lot of throwback to some of the stuff I'm going to say, but if you feel it relates to you, more power to you. So let's just dive straight in, shall we? All right, first things first, let's talk about anxious attachment at its core. Ultimately, we know that anxious attachers have a fear of rejection, abandonment, with a subconscious fear of commitment and growing intimacy. And the way this traditionally plays itself out and the way it's characterized is we often see the men, women, people who crave attention, need to have a lot of validation, more than the average person, need to also feel like their partner is reassuring them when they're feeling distressed in a relationship. When they get close and attached to someone, our inclination is to get closer. Our inclination is to fight for a relationship, to try and create and merge connection. For us, we often battle with deep fears of not being good enough, of not being worthy, or worrying that we're crazy, we're too much, and that we're too over the top for someone to ever really love us. And we often really find it difficult to self-regulate, reassure ourselves. And hello, Daniel, by the way. Thank you very much for greeting everyone. We find it very difficult to have a sense of self-sufficiency, independence, autonomy, and we struggle in relationships to feel like we're able to self-soothe when we are getting attached to another individual. This can mean that this stress that we feel can actually manifest in a variety of ways that don't often have the typical representation of someone who's just a very overly clingy, needy individual. In fact, many anxious attachers can actually be bloody independent on paper. They've got great looking careers, they're go-getters, they have their lives seemingly in check, and yet for some reason their romantic relationships seem to be a bit of a mess. They seem to find themselves constantly dating these emotionally unavailable people. They find that they, have had a history of professional career success, and yet for some reason their relationships just don't seem to match the success that they've had in other areas of their lives. They often have very low self-esteem inside of themselves, even if these individuals may come across as seemingly like, well, I'm put together, I know what I want, I can command a room and I know how to take care of myself. But yet deep down, they may often feel unworthy and unlovable in a lot of areas of life, least of which may also be romantically. Or sorry, I should say not least of which. Another thing to also consider is that anxious attachment is something that can be exhibited in areas outside of romantic relationships. It can influence the way in which we feel about our finances, say in which we have grown up in a very, say like, impoverished environment, and then we've gone on to have, a lot of financial success. We may truly never ever feel like we're able to have enough money. We're always worried about when the next client paycheck is coming in. We worry constantly of a recession looming in the distance and constantly obsess over how much money we have. We may be that person who that when we get money, we give it away because we just don't know what to do with it. So these attachment issues can actually show up in a wide variety of areas. But I'm not here today to talk about the various ways in which anxious attachment shows up. I think a lot of people can establish that for themselves. I'm here to talk about the shadow side of anxious attachment, which is a bit of an uncomfortable truth for a lot of us, which is where a lot of these insecurities, these fears of depth, commitment, and also intimacy may in fact come from. We know that the avoidant attacher has a fear of intimacy and commitment with a subconscious fear of abandonment. But for us, we often have the complete opposite, and it plays out in some very predictable ways. To start out with, when we look at the pattern of anxious attachers, we have a nasty tendency of tending to get ourselves with people who would continue to confirm our belief that we are not good enough, that we are unlovable, and that no one will ever really accept us for who we are. So we have a tendency to often date a lot of very equally emotionally unavailable people around us, because the dark reality is that a lot of us actually don't really want a relationship, at least not a real one. Many of us can be drawn to fantasy, the idea of the glossy knight in shining armor, the princess who can save us, or someone who's seemingly at our level. And I will talk more specifically about this because this can manifest itself a little bit differently depending on whether you're a man, a woman, even if you're a non-binary person too. But the point simply is to say that, we're often not actually attracted to a real relationship. We're attracted to the idea of just this dream of what we could potentially have. And so we opt to constantly choose relationships that, don't really end up serving our needs and constantly disappointing us because, hey, constant disappointment definitely beats the reality of actually being in a boring relationship where our nervous system isn't actually wired for that sort of stuff. So yeah, let's go through it one step at a time because there's a lot of things that I want to cover. I might actually start with the nervous system one first because this is really important. When we look at insecure attachment, right? A lot of it is built on a nervous system that is in fight or flight. So your sympathetic nervous system is fired up, and we often find a lot of anxious attachers, just like avoidant attachers, can have their coping mechanisms. They can be workaholics, they can be addicts of different kinds. We often see that people who are anxiously attached can have big extremes in terms of weight. Some of them may be people who have a lot of anorexic issues. Others may also struggle with weight and obesity, and they may also develop a lot of gut-related issues along their journey because a lot of them try and use food as a way to soothe their emotional distress. Often we find anxious attachers have overwhelming emotional distress, unlike the avoidant attachers who are suppressing, and so they often find ways to try and manage these big tides of emotions that come up outside of emotional suppression. Doesn't mean to say anxious attachers don't suppress their emotions, but they may find other ways to navigate it that isn't consciously pushing all of that stuff down. We often see that for anxious attachers in terms of their nervous system, if they're in a grounded sort of setting where things are more at peace, chill, calm, it can make them feel incredibly bored. It can make them feel so out of mind, out of body, and it makes them have a lot of unpleasant feelings about their future, about themselves. And so when we often see these folk in secure seeming relationships, this can cause them to dissociate and to fantasize about having a sexier, more engaging partner. We often find that when it comes to the anxious attachers in secure relationships, they're actually not satisfied. In fact, a lot of the time, they may actually start a fight just to get a hormonal rush of cortisol, just to try and feel something in the relationship. Sometimes this can be done because they're genuinely worried about whether their partner actually is connected to them or not. Other times it might be a case that they just want to feel alive and actually have something excite them. So can be a bit of a double whammy. So we often see that for people who have an anxious attachment in a relationship, they're not really settled and secure inside of themselves, and they're not really looking for a relationship where they can be themselves and actually feel accepted and loved. They're looking for something completely different. So let's maybe move the conversation now to one aspect in which we, as anxious attachers, can be deeply bloody avoidant. One of them is that this is in the realm of codependency, which is we're often looking for the fantasy partner. So deep down, Many of us may have gone to a schooling environment where we weren't treated well. We may have been bullied. We may have been teased by our caregivers. We may have been told that we're not pretty enough, good looking enough, we're a dork, whatever name is applicable to you. And you basically felt like you weren't accepted, right? And you always wanted to fit in to that cool crowd of people, that group of people who are the hot, good-looking individuals, and you wanted to try and have your glow-up season to be finally accepted by the jocks, the athletes, the cool girls who are part of that crowd. And you wanted to finally feel like you're fitting in and you finally have someone who is worthy of you. What we typically see is that someone, maybe for example a woman, is hoping for an athletic man who's well-built and is able to sweep her off her feet and take her away where she's finally going to be the envy of all the girls and be made to feel like she's living this amazing life where she's getting great sex, emotional availability, and a lot of deep connection from this fantasy figure. For the guy, he may egotistically be looking to strive for that one hot, manic pixie girl dream. He's constantly looking to chase this one girl who drives his nervous system wild. He'll turn down the girl who ticks all the boxes for stability over the girl who may have a bunch of red flags because deep down he wants to claim her. He wants to be able to prove that he can win her over and that he can finally feel accepted for being able to choose someone who's seemingly out of his league to make him feel better about himself. For both of these people, they're usually looking for someone to finally accept them, to get that acceptance from someone who's emotionally unavailable. For those of us that are in therapy, we know, if you're up to this stage, that trying to get the love and acceptance from someone who's emotionally unavailable is like trying to, succeed at a goal at the never-ending yardstick, meaning probably not going to happen in this lifetime. And so this can cause a lot of tremendous disappointment for anxious attachers who are never ending in their dream of trying to chase this person down and win them over. We also find that for a lot of anxious attachers in these kind of dynamics, they may also be looking to try and create a fantasy family with this person because they didn't get it from their own childhood of origin. They may be looking to try and have this mythical family experience where they're able to build this empire with their partner and succeed in life, which nicely leads into the point where I see a lot of anxious attachers, and even I've done this too, we overgive way too much to another person's dreams. We put in so much time and effort into another person that we're not actually taking charge of our own lives. I gotta say, anxious attachers in general, we can be phenomenal givers in terms of what we do for others, but by God, can we overgive in too many damn ways where at times we burn out, we become resentful, and especially if we're dating people who are emotionally unavailable, they don't have the capacity to give back what we think we're owed. So we often have tremendous resentment and anger and feel like we've never ever been loved, that this is so wildly unfair that we're being treated this way, and it can cause us to understandably rage. And I want to take a moment here to say, yeah, a lot of that sometimes can be justified depending on the circumstances, but a lot of the other times we may have unrealistic expectations. And I will talk about unrealistic expectations in a hot minute, but I want to focus on this point just for a minute, which is to say that many anxious attachers have a belief that if I give, I should receive back. If I do this for others, then surely they must do that for me in return. And this can be coming from a place of what I call manufactured guilt. It's this guilt that drives us to think, well, they might leave me if I don't do enough for them. I'm not going to be loved if I don't pour 100% into this relationship. If I don't do all these things, tick all these boxes, show up in this particular way, then I am not worthy for this person. And so it means we bend like pretzels to try and win these people, figures, work, whatever it is that we're going for in order to make ourselves appear more glossy to everybody else. Much of the time, we overinvest in other people so we can receive validation for ourselves to make us feel better about ourselves. And by the way, I want to take a hot minute to say, if anyone's here thinking, this sounds like narcissism, to a degree, it could be. But I want to make a moment here to say, hey, just remember that, narcissism along with attachment styles are rooted in survival. We all have a bit of, ego formation, looking to try and, prop ourselves up. And so a lot of the time for our ego, we are really doing a lot of work to try and make ourselves look helpful, to make ourselves look like we're actually dependable. We can take care of people. We can do all these amazing things for people. And again, we're really naturally very good at that because we often grew up in environments where we were made to feel like we weren't worthy, not acceptable, and we often strived in order to try and get our needs met to finally prove that we are worthy to those that are around us. I think it's really important to understand that in the realm of codependency, where we tend to be these individuals who are caregivers and overgivers, we're not really getting our needs met. At times, we are serving a subconscious need to try and avoid someone leaving us, to avoid also having real intimacy, because a lot of us don't actually feel like we can just be ourselves, that we can actually receive from another person. We believe that the only way to access love is to constantly give of ourselves to those around us without actually allowing another person into our lives. When I was talking earlier about how it can be very foreign for our nervous system to receive from another person, you'll know you're very anxiously attached if you also have someone giving stuff to you from a place of genuine love, because it feels damn uncomfortable. Much of the time we can be like, what the actual shit? Why is this person giving me so much attention? I don't feel like I'm worthy of this. This feels too much. This person's pedestaling me. They need to back the heck down now because this feels way too much for me to take on right now. So a lot of the time we can often think the other person must be blind, stupid, or just whack for showing us love because we don't think we've earned it. Much of the time, we feel like we have to earn love from another person in order to receive it. And that gets us into these horrible binds where we're constantly chasing and striving for love and never actually accepting it from another person. We often also feel that when we're in a more secure relationship that there's nothing to do, that there's nothing to earn. And so that can cause us to feel deeply unworthy and to feel like we don't deserve to be in this romantic relationship. A lot of the time, we can really feel as though we're just not in the relationship for us and that there should be more hard work involved. And we may even end up blowing up a perfectly good relationship because we feel like this isn't for us. So it's important to bear in mind that when linking a lot of these themes together, that much of the time we're not actually really looking for a romantic relationship when we're in that state of heightened anxious attachment. We're trying to run away from that. The other thing to also think about too is that in some of these cases with anxious attachment, if we're constantly overgiving and never receiving, it may be done defensively. Maybe we're worried that if we don't actually give, that we're somehow not going to be worthy of that reception of love. Maybe for us too, it's a feeling that, without that we feel empty inside of ourselves and we're actually masking a lot of depression because we don't feel like beneath us that anyone would want to choose us. Another thing that can actually come up too is that for individuals who have grown up in very dysfunctional households, children of addicts, they may choose to date even more dysfunctional people because it serves a purpose. I don't think I'm going to be understood by someone who's secure because they won't even understand my issues. A lot of single parents will often choose to date people who seemingly have an array or plethora of other issues to them because they think, we're relatable, we'll know what we've gone through, we'll be able to join together. And in theory, that makes sense. However, if you're joining with someone who hasn't worked on their issues, you may be multiplying yours. So we often choose to date out of fear, not out of a place of, I'm actually worthy of love and I deserve to be with someone who respects me and I trust that I'll be okay in this relationship. I'm now going to just pull out a few other pointers that I wrote down because I want to go through these a bit systematically as there are a lot of things that I want to cover with this. So let's dive straight in. So with regards to wanting to be saved, I touched on this a bit briefly, but I want to just expand on it for a moment here too. I think a lot of the time, a lot of anxious attachers, we do have these big fantasies of wanting someone to kind of pick us up and actually rescue us from our situation. The flip side is we can be the one who wants to do a lot of the saving. Men, traditionally, known as the nice guys or the white knights, may come and swoop in and try and, overgive in order to try and prove themselves lovable to their partner. Another thing I also want to attach to this too is this idea of unrealistic expectations. One dangerous aspect of the anxious attachment is that we are masters of projection. I mean, avoidant attachers can do this too, but we are way too damn good at telling other people, well, I behave like this, so you should behave like this. If I'm this way, you should be thinking this way. Classic example. If I'm fighting for love, they should be fighting for love. But for those of you that have watched my content, you will know that when I talk about different attachment styles, particularly avoidant attachment styles, they ain't fighting to build connection in a relationship. They're going to do the complete opposite because they're wired differently from us. We have a tendency where we want to try and imagine that because we would do this, that the other person might do this. For example, let's use a classic anxious and avoidant experience. Let's say you've recently been broken up abruptly by your avoidant partner. They reach out to you and in a froth of emotion, you're like, oh my God, they said they want to chat. That must mean they want to reconcile the relationship. They see me, they understand me, they finally get me. When in fact, all that person just said was that they'd be open to chatting and that avoidant person may never actually want to reach out to you at all. It's so easy for us to get caught up in the thick of our emotions and to project and believe, oh, that person knows exactly what I'm feeling. When it's like, no. A lot of the time, particularly with avoidant attachers, they're going through two simultaneous emotions. Interest, fear. They're not usually thinking the same thing in terms of, what we're going through. I can see someone's asked, is anxiously avoidant the same as fearful avoidant? So just to distinguish what I'm talking about today, I'm not talking about fearful avoidance or disorganized folk. I'm talking about anxious attachers and how we have a subconscious fear of intimacy and commitment, and we are very avoidant ourselves. So we're purely talking about anxious attachers here today. So just wanted to make that clarification, even though the title might read a bit confusingly about that. We're not talking about fearful avoidance. So the other thing to also bear in mind too is that a lot of anxious attachers might, get really worked up into a lot of anger, and they might also have a tendency, for example, if they're dating someone who is different to them, like someone with an avoidant attachment, and, they really need a lot of reassurance, they might get angry at their partner when they don't hear back from them under what they might consider to be a reasonable time. They may not tell their partner, hey, this really affected me and this really hurt me. Instead, they may often bottle it up. Maybe they don't know how to communicate or express themselves. Hey, a lot of us don't. Or they may over-communicate and send these long, drawn-out text messages, voice messages, criticizing and demeaning the other person and making them feel like an absolute piece of shit because they seemingly couldn't mind read what the anxious attacher actually wanted or needed. A lot of the time, I actually think sometimes we are way too good at communicating and we need to cut that back because often we don't need to express ourselves that much. We're often we often may emotionally dump on our partner in a way where it can come across as an emotional attack. We might say things like, I felt like you weren't validating my emotions and all you wanted to do was to talk about yourself, rather than saying, hey, listen, I know you want to talk about your own stuff and that's very fair. I do feel a bit ignored when I don't actually, get to talk about my own stuff. Is it okay if we just, chat about my stuff instead? There is a tendency for us to just blast people from time to time. Otherwise, the alternative is we don't actually talk about it at all and we build up a lot of resentment inside of ourselves, which can manifest in issues down the line as well. So it can be either or in that case. I think it's just very important to understand that when we as anxious attachers, go into this space, be very mindful of the big emotions you have, ranging from anxiety to euphoria, particularly in dating. We have a nasty habit of trusting our emotions blindly and, reading into things like, for example, the emojis our partner uses, the way in which they use certain words, the amount of texting they have from woe to go, and just micro-analyzing everything and making it mean something that it's actually not. Yes, a lot of the time we are looking for certainty, clarity, stability, because we thrive on structure. We want to feel a sense of where we're all going with this. But we can often use innocuous things which don't actually mean anything. And a lot of this stuff is usually coming from our inner child who's screaming, being like, I just want love and connection, and I want this person to love me and make me feel good. And I know that our inner children do need a lot of love, but when that inner child is running the show, you better believe your adult brain just got thrown into the back seat and you're not going to a comfortable location. So just be very mindful that the highs of euphoria in dating do not necessarily translate to grounded, rational thinking. So that's one thing. Oh, this is something I've been meaning to talk about for a while. So traditionally we think of people who have anxious attachment as people who really want love and want relationships. We actually have a very dark sibling, which is called love anorexia. Many of us actively pursue, love and get caught in the fantasy of that, hence the love addicts, the codependents. But love anorexics are the complete opposite, who belong to our same bandwagon as well too. These are the folk who actively choose not to date, not to love, not because they're bachelors or because they're asexuals, but because they're deathly afraid of being close to someone in love. Not avoidant attachment issues. We're actually talking, these individuals have been so scared by bad experiences with people that they've been around that they found love has hurt them too much, that they got too involved in someone and their feelings weren't reciprocated. So these individuals, for one reason or another, and it could have also come from serious issues like abuse, assault, have actually maybe been that one person that you know who's packed on a ridiculous amount of weight and says they're not looking for love or is very shy and cautious about that. This individual might be very good as a caregiver to the point where it can kind of be a bit overwhelming and overbearing. But what they do is they push love away from them because they're so scared of ever getting close to that person. They may use their weight as a way of protecting themselves from actually having anyone look in because they think, well, no one's going to want me when I look this size. So their body becomes a shield from allowing anyone in. That's just one example. I'm just saying this also as a point to say that we have a tendency to deprive ourselves of a lot of emotional nurture when we really need it. It can be very dangerous for us to oscillate between extremes where we're very love hungry and need a lot of reassurance, or we cut off the supply completely and overgive to too many people because we want to be helpful. We want to show that we're functional. We want to show that we're a valuable asset to people as well. This nicely leads into another aspect where I talked a little bit about caregiving and how that's in the realm of codependency, but I also want to talk about where this becomes an act of control. Many anxious attachers can use their care as a way to guarantee that a person is going to stick around and do things for them. We can often use our gift giving, our acts of service, our demonstrations of love, and believe if I do X plus Y, I will get Z in return. We treat our actions like a formula to suggest that if we do all this stuff, then naturally this person should do this stuff for us. So it's very important to be aware that some anxious attachers may dwell way too heavy in trying to use their care for others as a way to guarantee connection and that people won't leave them. This can become very dysfunctional, where some anxious attachers will often look after their ailing parents because they want to finally feel like they're getting their approval, their care, but often they can come across as just very toxic, very grumpy, very sullen individuals who are pushing away other people in an effort to prove what an amazing charitable martyr they are. So please be mindful of the martyrdom that we see from anxious attachers, because it's not often a sign of someone who's welcoming love in. If anything, they're pushing it away because they're trying to protect themselves. So yes, I see this person's here has written, they see love in a transactional manner. That is exactly right. In fact, a lot of anxious attachers, and I've done this myself, I'm not pleased to admit this, can use gift giving, and it's a form of emotional manipulation. We have to be very careful as anxious attachers that if we do an action, it's not to try and derive an outcome to gain love from another person. it's one of those things where we have to learn, if we're going to be intentional about it, we're doing it for the sake of it, not because we hope that that person is going to stick around and stay with us. It can be very easy for a lot of us to do things in the thought of, well, if I do this, then I'm going to get this in return, and not even express that you're doing it to that person for that intended outcome as well too. It can be very hard to just genuinely do things from the bottom of your heart, where once upon a time you were a master chef for your friends and family. You were gift giving and doing all these amazing lavish exercises for those that were around you. In therapy and over time, you may get to a stage where you're like, fuck that shit. I'm not going out of my way for other people like I used to. And that's one of the many steps that you often take in order to be like, yeah, I need to pour all that attention I put into other people back to myself. But we're not here to talk about the recovery from anxious attachment today. We're here to continue talking about all the wonderful ways in which we sabotage our relationships, most importantly to ourselves. And also, we don't end up getting what we really want, which is a loving, committed relationship. And let's see, what else have I got here? I've mentioned chasing unavailable people, not wanting commitment. Oh, yeah. One other thing that I also want to stress too, which is this sense of arrested development that a lot of anxious attachers have. And it might come as a bit of a surprise. We normally think of the avoidant attachers as being arrested in their development, emotionally speaking, but anxious attachers can also have this quality as well too. We often see that there can be a lot of anxious attachers who don't actually want to deal with the rigors of adulthood, meaning that they may not want to actually focus on their finances. They may not want to focus on actually building a career for themselves. They may leave a lot of important things that are important to them on the back burner and not deal with it. Often they over-prioritize the needs of their friends, their family, whoever it is in their life, over their own relevant issues. At worst, romantic relationships can become a distraction where they deprive a lot of the important things that they need to be taking care of themselves. To give a classic example of this, you might know that person who you've been hanging out with for a while, who you don't hear from after a time because they get so overly invested in their romantic relationships that it's just like they vanished off the face of the planet. And these individuals can often just not really have a good sense of self. They often feel like they need to constantly be preoccupied with whatever's going on romantically in their lives, and they never really take the time to actually get their own lives sorted. One of the tricks for a lot of anxious attachers is actually tending to the fires that are going on in our lives that are actually relevant to us, because too often we're trying to solve everyone else's issues rather than taking the initiative to actually build our careers up properly for ourselves, have a steady financial system, have proper eating and health. We often neglect so many of those aspects because we think, yeah, I can handle it, I can be fine. Another example of this also might be the classic therapist friend. Many of us anxious attachers, I gotta say, can be phenomenal in the department of listening to other people, but not listening to our own damn emotional woes and issues. Often at times we can have a lot of somatic problems that come and go, and also we're not tending to properly. And we may put that also on the back burner because everybody else's issues are way more important than mine until it gets to a point where it's too damn late and that becomes a bigger issue overall. Many anxious attachers can have poor oral hygiene, personal hygiene, and even if they are grooming themselves and looking impressive, often it's actually not for their own benefit. Once again, it's done for the benefit of the way in which they look for other people. So it's very important to bear in mind that for a lot of us, we have to learn to do things for ourselves, even if it's bloody frustrating, boring, doesn't seem like we're getting any value out of it, but it is part of our pathway to recovery because too often we are spending way too much time investing in people who will never give back to us properly. So that's another aspect of this too. I'm going to link onto that by saying a lot of the time too, a trap that a lot of us anxious attachers can fall into is we have way too many emotionally unavailable people in our lives, and we tend to prioritize the people who are more difficult over the people who are more stable and also very good at reciprocating for us. Often we're trying to fix the unfixable, to try and prove to our emotionally unavailable friends who look may be fantastic in theory, but we're expecting also things from them that are just not realistic. We may be turning to our avoidant attacher friends, expecting them to emotionally open up to us. They ain't ever going to do that much of the time. And if they do, amazing. They did it on their own. You know, a lot of the time we can be trying to get individuals to finally appreciate and accept what we're going through emotionally, when it's like, look, they're not going to be able to do that. And it can be hard for us to turn to people who are actually always consistent, present, kind, loving, because we have these fun friends who we want to please. We want to be part of the it crowd. We want to finally be accepted and loved. And it can be a real challenge for us to stop entertaining the problematic individuals and start turning towards those who are actually better for us. At worst, this kind of behavior can be deeply problematic when we're spending way too many times with the people who have really, really big issues and we're trying to fix them. If we're with individuals who have serious challenges that they're going through, addiction, personality disorders, mental health issues, we often think, well, maybe if I do X, Y, Z for them, I'll be able to fix them out of this. I'll be able to change and transform them into this. I don't want to be cliche and say, duh, we can't change people. But something inside of us might be doing this because we get so hooked at the idea of a challenge and being able to prove ourselves and win this person over that once again, we're choosing unavailability over consistency and love, hence why we can be damn avoidant to ourselves at times. Going back to the list of what I was talking about, so something that I haven't really talked about at length but is worth talking about is love addiction. So one of the problematic issues that can happen, which coincides with fantasy seeking, codependency, is that we can be damn junkies for the romance of a relationship. Often when we're dating people with more of a fearful avoidant attachment style and we're going through more of like that boomerang style relationship, we can often get high on the oxytocin, the dopamine of when someone is pouring attention and love our way. Then we get hit by a cortisol rush, oxytocin withdrawal when our partner starts to retreat from us. And then when they come back and say, I'm so sorry, I want to be with you, we get flooded again with a lot of yummy hormones whilst also on edge because we're worried that this person might leave us. This is an example. But the point I'm trying to say is that we can often be junkies to a lot of the emotional dysregulation inside of us, not actually being aware that we're just contributing to a very dysfunctional cycle for ourselves as well as for our partner. And it's far easier to stick it out with the people who cause this dysfunctionality, because this leads on to another point that I wanted to make, which is sometimes we will pick the devil we know versus the devil we don't. I see a lot of us anxious attachers sticking it out in very emotionally unhealthy relationships. In these situations, I often see our physical ailments go through the damn roof. Heightened blood pressure, trips to the doctors to solve all these stress-based symptoms, gut issues, fibromyalgia, you name it. I have seen clients who've been rushed into hospital because being with someone who was avoidantly attached caused them to have so many goddamn issues. I mean, they could have been with a narcissist too, but like the point is when there's a lot of emotional dysregulation and also that person's anxiety is going through the roof and they're like, oh my God, like, you know, is this person going to finally commit to me? To paint an example, say we've got a person who's been dating an individual for 10 years and that avoidant person refuses to talk about commitment, and it causes the anxious person to feel so scared because they worry that if they actually communicate, that avoidant partner will leave them and not want to be with them. And so they may be sitting on their needs, chewing away on food to avoid the discomfort of the stress that's building up inside of them, and they may finally crack and snap when they get sent to hospital because they're going through a serious stress-based episode. In this particular situation, the anxious attacher may finally change their ways after getting to rock bottom. If not, they may end up not wanting to leave their partner or make some radical changes and have a conversation with their partner because they're so worried about what it would feel like to be abandoned. In this case, the literal thing that's going on is this individual is just scared of facing uncomfortable emotions. I've seen a lot of anxious attachers in similar situations. They're thugging it out because they're so worried about the fear of rejection. But ironically enough, that is also serving a subconscious purpose because they're choosing to stay in a relationship that's not working for them or their avoidant partner, but it works better for them because then they don't have to face their own issues of actually building a life for themselves. For example, a lot of the time, the distraction of dealing with a romantic partner means you don't have to deal with a lot of the other things that you need to be working on. And I've seen a lot of anxious attachers where they might be in really unhappy relationships, marriages, have children, and they haven't worked a day in their life, and they'll say things like, well, I hate this marriage, but I can't leave this now because what would I do with my life? I've never worked a day in my life. Now, this is an extreme example, but the danger is that we become so codependent on this relationship and we think that sticking it out is going to make us look good in the future, that we've really shot ourselves in the foot from actually giving ourselves a life that we deserve for ourselves. So this is another dark side of where anxious attachment meets avoidancy in ourselves, and we're denying ourselves a life that we actually should have. So unfortunately, this is incredibly common, which is why we often see the avoidant attachers going with people like that because, hey, it works out in their own twisted ways. Now, going back to the list of what I had, this was one I wanted to talk about. So at the beginning of this live, I talked a little bit about the gender dynamics of how men and women may date who have an anxious attachment. One thing I found for people who are straight men who are dating, and gay men can do this too, can't speak for lesbians, unfortunately, but I have noticed that men who are anxiously attached, who are dating, are ones who complain chronically sometimes about, I don't, and a lot of other anxious attachers don't too, but a lot of anxious attachers who are men may get into a victim state where they're like, the algorithm is stacked against me. Look at all these women or dudes. They're so good looking. They have a list of choices of what they can choose. I always feel like it's unfair because the odds are stacked against me and I'll never be able to be with someone who I think is worthy of me. Now, out of respect to these men, gay or straight, bisexual included, I really understand where a lot of this is coming from because they feel like there's a sense of unfairness to this situation. Often a lot of their ego and their inner child is running away from them, being like, it's not fair that I'm not being loved and I'm not being chosen and I'm not being accepted. I get that. But often these individuals are trying to pick women or men who are physically, academically, professionally out of their league. And they're wanting to be with these people because they think, well, I'm successful, therefore I should have a person who matches my seeming success. And if we lived in a metric-based society where human beings chose success for success, where that useless dating advice of high value will match high value, then surely that would be the way it works. But it's not. And so often a lot of anxious attachers, particularly straight men I found, and gay men, will fall into nasty traps where they beat themselves up thinking, if I was fitter, if I was smarter, if I was just prettier, then I'd finally be able to have these people that I want to date. But they're often they're often trying to date people who are emotionally unavailable as well. So it was never going to give them the love that they deserve. So they're constantly trying to push back at the idea of a committed relationship. Once again, avoidance from actually being with someone who's actually good for them. And I think probably the more common side we see for women is, again, that example of caretaking, where they often find that they're choosing men who are constantly disappointing them, men who, are very emotionally immature, and complaining constantly about the woes of men and how no man seemingly has the capacity to be mature enough for them. And look, once again, I get it. I know a lot of men do not have a lot of emotional maturity. A lot of them can. A lot of them can be very self-aware. But a lot of women are consciously choosing men who are emotionally unavailable because part of them is actually benefiting from this situation too. It fulfills a role, even though unfortunately it's not necessarily something that's good for them. They do it because inside of them it's trying to fulfill something that's going on, and it's completely diverting them from the path of actually dating someone who's more secure. This nicely links up to an issue which I find for a lot of us anxious attachers is we focus way too much sometimes on the superficialities of dating. We focus too much on how the person needs to look instead of how this needs to feel inside of ourselves. We focus way too much on, well, I'm just not attracted to that person. And I think the dating apps have a lot to blame for this in the sense, and this is where I'm actually going to lob blame, because dating apps are designed in such an attraction-based model where you're often choosing based on the physical appearance of a person and a list of traits and qualities can kind of blend into each other. Much of the time, we're not really choosing people who have substance. We're looking at really what seemingly ticks our boxes. Now, not every person who's gorgeous is emotionally unavailable. I get that. But often we're choosing people subconsciously for reasons that are not healthy for us. We're choosing the jock, the athlete, the person who's, got an issue with regards to their drinking problem, someone who looks like they need to be fixed, someone who we're looking to get approval from, because, again, it serves a purpose for us inside of ourselves. Much of the time, it's actually probably better for us to start hanging out with people who are just down to earth, hanging out with people who you might feel are boring, but are actually better for your nervous system in the long run. Because when we're with the humdrum, regular folk, it means that we're actually getting used to what it's like to be around people who are stable, steady, consistent, and aren't giving us those electric fireworks that we assume equates to love and happily ever after. If the butterflies was ever going to be an indicator of happily ever after, well, Disney would not have the bad rap that it has for depicting love in such a one-dimensional way. Needless to say, we tend to focus way too much on the superficial and not enough time on the substance of actually getting to know someone. Because yes, I'm not here to say attraction isn't important. Yes, we need to be physically attracted to our partner. But too often we're in a rush. Much of the time I find for a lot of us anxious attachers, we are focusing way too much sometimes on forcing intimacy. Yes, the avoidant attachers do it too. I'm not here to discount that. I know a lot of avoidant attachers rush intimacy as well. But sometimes in an effort to try and find out if we're going to be safe with this person, we're going to be secure with this person, we're going to be okay, we start over-divulging stuff which is kind of over the top. We start saying things to people like, oh, just to let you know my boundaries on date one, here are all the things that trigger me. I've done this, don't recommend it. You start opening up by being like, do you know what your attachment style is? And you may even try, and I've done this before, don't recommend it, to model how to be vulnerable and to be safe. And you might even start saying things like, oh, I just need to let you know that when I was younger, I had this really serious abusive incident happen to me around abandonment. So I just need to let you know that if you ghost me, it's really going to affect me. So I'd appreciate it if you don't do that. Some might say it's relevant information. I say if you're dating an avoidant attacher, it's not going to matter because the minute that they're hijacked into their anxiety, they're not going to care. Many avoidant attachers, when they're into their anxiety, I know that what they do is problematic and traumatic. I'm not here to rub that away. We get that bit. But trying to hand over all your passcodes and all that information to try and, force intimacy with someone that early on in dating is a double-edged sword because you're giving so much trust. Once again, you're overgiving in the expectation that this person will be able to maintain that and give back to you down the line. Like I said at the start of this particular chat, we are way too good at overgiving and not very good at receiving for ourselves. So overall, I just wanted to paint a picture of what it can be like when we are dysfunctional and very avoidant to ourselves. I mean, I gotta be honest, it's not comfortable having this conversation as someone who's part of Team Anxious. I've been working on my stuff now for years, and there are times where I'm like, why the fuck did I do that? And it's really annoying when I have to work through all this stuff. So I get the groans, I get the frustration for people who may not want to hear this. Take any of this from what you will. Not every anxious attacher is the same as one another. Some of us are mild, some of us are severe. It's the same with us beautiful avoidant attachers that are out there as well too. I'm just here to paint a picture to say, just before you go off and declare that, it's just the avoidant attachers that need to do the work, we have our own shit to shovel. And it's not exactly a pleasant street to walk down, but things are going to be so much cleaner and better for everyone involved once we finally get on with it. All right. Thanks for coming to this portion of my TED Talk. Let's move into question and answers. So, by the way, you can ask me questions about anything. It doesn't have to be specifically about being an anxious attacher. So, let's go straight into this. Okay. Could someone be a fearful avoidant if he talks about his feelings, cries in front of me, then acts hot and cold? Yes. 100% yes. This is going to be content that I'll put out at some point, but I want to reiterate, avoidant attachers are bloody hypersensitive. There can be very big emotors. Often, a lot of the time in the early stages of dating, a lot of avoidant attachers can cry. They can cry seemingly over very small things too. Take them to a movie and they're bawling in tears. Ask them about their 5-year plan and they're having a big meltdown. You know, these individuals do not have the same emotional resilience as, say, the anxious attachers do, because they're suppressing a lot of their emotions. They don't have the tools to navigate their emotional stuff. So, I mean, they're sweethearts in general, even though obviously the avoidancy side of things is nasty to be on the receiving end of. But I want people to be very aware that just because you may interpret an avoidant attacher's coldness as robotic does not mean they have an absence of emotions. They may be cognitively empathetic, meaning that if you're going through a tough time, they may not be able to empathize with it because they're so disconnected from themselves. But being emotionally disconnected does not mean insensitive. They don't have blunt nerve endings. They are very, very easily triggered by a lot of things. So please take this information with all this in mind to say that absolutely, even a dismissive avoidant could behave this way, although in my experience, the dismissives don't usually have that same sort of emotionality. I'd argue the fearful avoidants are far more emotional, especially in the early stages of dating, before things get a little too emotionally close and off they go. Months of therapy still going, and now I see all the text mail chat I had with an FA as ooh, very cringe. Am I healing or am I stepping back to inner critic self-bullying? Let me tell you what I think without obviously you being my client. So take what I'm about to say with a pinch of salt. I know for me, when I've started looking back at an ex's messages, who was avoidant, and started going through them, I didn't have those same euphoric feelings as I once had. I often was looking back going, what? And I'd be looking at some of the same stuff where I used to excuse behavior. I used to say things like, oh, I'm sure they're just busy. And I'd look at it with fresher eyes because I'm more emotionally grounded. And I'd look at it going, what? And I'd start also thinking, why is this attractive? And even at the time, if I'm completely honest, I'd look back on it and go, yeah, I didn't find that funny at the time. And yet I chose to laugh at it because I was so scared of losing the person. So I'd say if you're looking at it more with skepticism, with less of those big emotions, then I'd argue from my experience, you're healing because you're not having such a reaction to it. If, on the other hand, you're beating yourself up and saying, you're such an idiot for liking this person, how could you have seen any of this as signs of true love, friendship, whatever is relevant for you, I would say, I'd say there's probably some conversations that need to be had with your inner critic to tell that thing to shut the fuck up and not to let it run the show. But yeah, generally I'd say if your emotionality around this is not as intense, I think you're doing a pretty good job. So just want to put that out there. I can see one user has said, it's easy being vulnerable with things you've processed and that won't paint you in a negative manner. This is fake vulnerability. I love this so much. Okay, so this is something that I know Therapy Jeff talked about, and I think he said it's what did he say it was? Oh, vulnerability light is the way he described it, and it was brilliant. So basically, let's paint a picture, right? Okay, let's say you're on a first date and you're getting to know one another, and, you're deciding to open up and be like, so, in my childhood, I was beaten up by my father. We just had a court case to sort out issues with regards to property. And, I'm just really glad to be out of that situation. Oh, and also all my exes have cheated on me and they're all clearly narcissists. And I've just, gotten to a point now where I'm just, living my best life and choosing to just live in a way which is really serving myself, right? That's a bit of an extreme example. Another one might be something like on a second date, someone's opening up being like, so by the way, I just need to let you know that in my last relationship, I was, financially robbed by my partner. And again, it's just sort of like, whoa. Okay, I want to just say two major things. I get why people do this. I understand that people are looking for, connection. And I understand that people want to feel safe with the partner they're dating. I totally get that. But using that kind of information that early on in a way that doesn't feel appropriate is in the realm of love bombing and is also not a healthy way to build connection. That's not vulnerability. Vulnerability would be classically if you're in an experience where, say, you are not getting your wants and needs met and you would like to have your wants and needs met. For example, you've been dating someone for a while, they've been very good at consistently messaging you until all of a sudden it's like a light switch has gone out and they're not communicating with you as consistently as they were. You reach out and go, hey, just wanted to check in. I love our conversations and I was just hoping to hear back from you a bit more. And, you want to further up by saying eventually, listen, for me, I really need consistency in order to feel reassured in this budding experience that we've got going on. I don't need you to text me every day. That's totally fine. But at least I just like to hear, where you're at, because that way I feel like I'm still able to maintain my investment. That is vulnerability. If you're being vulnerable in such a way where you're sharing information that may potentially hurt or also cause a partner to leave without worrying too much about whether you might worry about that, but basically expressing something that might cause a rupture in a relationship that's actually important, you are being vulnerable. You are sharing a part of yourself that it allows for greater glue to connect the two of you together. You're not using a part of your history as a way to try and force love and connection to try and build artificial intimacy with someone. So that was a really good point. I'm laughing so badly right now. That is definitely not vulnerability. It's trauma dumping. Yeah. And what my ex both did very early on to get it out of the way. Yeah, So I have a mate who I dated actually way back in the day, and they behaved in a way that was like that. And for me, just for a bit of transparency, look, I understood why they did what they did, but when I actually did say to them, look, I did feel like I was being love bombed hard, and they acknowledged it. And even though that experience quickly transformed into friendship, it is just one of those things that where you've been around the block and you are basically feel like you're turning into a therapy session and you're just emotionally, you're being emotionally dumped on. I'd be asking them to pay you and submitting them an invoice, because that is not how you should be building connection. If you just think about it like this, if you met a friend for the first time and they were saying to you, I don't want you to leave me because every single person I've ever known has left me, that's ridiculous. That's an unrealistic expectation, and it's not fair to you that you should necessarily be beholden to this person's anxieties around fear of abandonment. That's ridiculous. My ex and I both did it. I was also doing it. I was doing it fearful avoidant with fearful avoidant. Don't worry, you'll learn. It's fine. The buddy that I was talking about is also fearful avoidant, so all I'm going to say is I know the signs, and I was like, thanks for this 3-hour therapy chat that I didn't get paid for. But it's okay. You live and you learn. Let's see, what else have we got here? How do you know if you're anxiously attached with avoidant traits or fearful avoidant? Easy. I'm going to make this really reductive. Have you ever been in a relationship where you really liked the person and then all of a sudden you had huge anxiety and then found a way to destroy or leave the relationship? If that is you, you have a massive part of avoidant attachment. If you do not, you probably are more anxious or secure. The thing to help everyone understand this is we all can have traits of anxiousness. We can all have traits of avoidancy, but typically we find the attachment is dominant. And I know that books like Attached will say, well, attachment styles are fluid. Yes and no, in the sense that I find that we have like a primary attachment, and it may you may behave differently depending on the person's attachment style and how that's affecting yours, and whether or not that's causing secure, anxious, avoidant. But typically you'll have more traits of one than the others. So just to bear in mind, like with certain people in my life who I'm close to, I could not be more avoidant. I'm like, ciao. And then other people, I'm like, by the way, avoidants don't always do that. But other cases, I'm with people where they're clearly more avoidant and it sends my head into a spiral. Not as bad as it used to be, but the point simply is to say that, the interactions we have can have an impact on our base. But our base may be defined, like I said, by one style over another. I also just think too that, for fearful avoidance, because disorganized attachers, fearful avoidance, often get, I think confused with the anxious attachers. I'm also going to help to break it down a little bit more as well too. Fearful avoidance are generally, pushing people away due to mistrust. They've often had terrible experiences with caregivers who are bloody inconsistent. And by that, I mean like they're often the children of addicts, narcissists, people where there were broken promises and also a feeling of deep inadequacy where they shouldn't own up, talk about any of their feelings. Now that childhood could also apply to an anxious attacher, but the behavior that comes out is often very different. Where the anxious attacher and the fearful avoidant both want reassurance and often seek a lot of closeness from another person, the avoidant part of the fearful avoidant will usually, without fail, pop up and push that person away where they may back away. Whereas the anxious attacher's tendency is to try and go further in and to try and pursue and to try and get closer to that person without ever wanting to push away from that person. So that's where I would distinguish and say when that attachment system hits for the fearful avoidant, they'll pull away. Whereas for the anxious attacher, they'll try and get closer. So that's how I would describe that to anyone who's wondering, because I understand, look, hell, I've done this too. A lot of us question, am I fearful avoidant? Am I anxiously attached? Am I even a dismissive avoidant? What the hell am I? Easiest way to remember it is when your attachment system flares up, what is usually your first port of call? I know for many people who are anxiously attached, we're more likely to act avoidant when we're being given a lot of affection and love that feels unearned by us. That's usually a key that you're not a disorganized attacher. What else have we got? Please save this live. Thank you. Of course, I will later. I'm in no contact with my situationship. Can I just say, this is hilarious to anyone who's watching this. Someone's put like the ship emoji with situation. It's hilarious. I'm in no contact with my situationship ex. I see her every day because we live in the same village. How to deal? I remember answering this question. So I'll repeat it again for anyone who's interested. This is a tricky one because it's very hard to recover when you've got constant reminders of an ex. I don't want to say move village because that's an inappropriate thing to say. If it were me and I was in close proximity to an ex, I would really want to try and find active ways to reduce contact with that person. Things that I might do include putting away all memorabilia, belongings, items that reminded me of this person in a safe space. So that way I just don't have those, reminders, triggers, activating memories. So I don't get into that addictive loop. I would also take the time to probably speak to a therapist about this as well too, just so that way I can help you out of it. Have boundaries where if you do run into your ex, you have plans for how to navigate it. Because I often find anytime I've run into an ex who's been avoidantly attached, it's set my nervous system on fire and I felt like I'm in a bit of a fight or flight state. It's brutal. So it's good to have plans for how you're going to navigate that. I would definitely treat this like addiction recovery, which is you're looking to reduce any triggers that are causing flare-ups with this. And generally speaking, I would say that you may want to find emotional regulation tools for yourself that help. Journaling, writing out love letters and hate letters that you don't send to this person, just to really validate the experience you've been through. It's a brutal detox that's made harder by the influence. It's just like if you're a meth addict and you've got meth lying around everywhere or the dealers are right outside, it's tough. So I can't really give you a clear answer and say, take this pill and you'll be okay by tomorrow. So I do apologize for the situation you're in because it's not fun. All right, I'm going to answer a few more and then I'm going to call it a night. Can a dismissive avoidance seem secure at first when you start dating? Absolutely. Many avoidant attachers can appear bloody secure in the beginning stages of dating, claiming they want a relationship, they want marriage, they want kids, they want everything. So please bear in mind that a lot of the time they can often be very forthcoming. They can show initiative. They can be incredibly consistent. But there are a few signs that they are more avoidantly attached, which you'll learn over time. Hell, I've done lives on this, so if you need to go and check that information out, it's available. But short answer is yes. Many avoidant attachers often think they're secure as well. I saw this great video today by, I think his name is Travis Ambrose. He's a coach, and he does a lot of avoidant videos. He does attachment videos, and there was this hilarious video that he did today about how avoidant attachers can be addicted to self-help related material, and they don't actually really integrate it because they can't process their emotions. And I had a chuckle with that because I was like, I know so many people who are like that, where they are self-help junkies. And the thing is too, right, that self-help often is written by fellow people who I suspect have avoidant attachment, because the material itself, whilst it can be practical at times, is often very rational, not very emotional based, high in motivation, and doesn't really help people to get too deep, which is where if you go into psychology texts, obviously things become a lot more in deep because you have to work through your emotional stuff. I'm not shitting on self-help. I think self-help is fantastic for a lot of people. I've consumed many self-help books in my time, but I think it does tend to attract a crowd of people who don't want to feel, they want to do. And that can be problematic if those people also have coping mechanisms to avoid their feelings. So just throwing it out there. Also watching other human bonds you have, it troubles were just with that person. Well, it says a lot. Yes, agreed. If you find that you are with a partner who has issues with other individuals and their attachment styles, then that should give you some warning lights as to what's potentially going on. I know many dismissive avoidants, fearful avoidants, will often rewrite the history of their past and say things like, oh, my ex, we just weren't that compatible. Oh, they weren't my type. Oh, we just see things so differently. When it's like, no, you didn't. In the early stages of dating, you were having sex together. You were telling each other how much you loved each other. Don't try and write this off like you never had that history together. Come on, you're better than that. So yeah, all right. I'm going to do, have I got any more? I think I've got one more and then I'm going to call it a night. I have anxious tendencies, but not so severe. I mainly attract severe avoidance, so I'm severe, I guess. No, not necessarily. I want to just say that when you are dating people with severe avoidant attachment, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have a severe anxious attachment. It just may mean that there's some stuff subconsciously that you're drawn to with these people. So I'd say probably better to speak to a therapist about that. Hell, speak to one of my team members. We're taking clients, even if I'm not. Feel free to go to the link in my bio if you want to book a session in just to sort of have this conversation. I swear things have improved so much since I started speaking with someone years ago. So all I'm just trying to say is, look, this isn't my sleazy sales pitch. It's just to say, don't try doing this on your own. I understand if finances are tough, don't worry. Just focus on your finances, watch my videos, and just use that for now. But if you have the means, don't try and be, a solo sailor. It's just a bad approach to have in a lot of this sort of stuff. All right, one more, and then we're done for the night. In men who can't love, they suggest we don't chase a mother avoidance. Did that have anything else attached to it, or was that it? Yes. Okay. So short answer is yes, and this nicely ties into the theme of this live that I've done today. If you are someone who is dating an avoidant attacher, I don't care what your attachment style is, do not chase them when they're pulling away. Do not mother them. Do not try and, coddle them. Do not try and match their energy, which I know sounds weird when you're hearing me say this with everything else. It's really about taking that time to build your own self-sufficiency and have a life outside of your partner. Hard when you're in the thick of it, but essential if they're shutting down, especially if they're severely avoidant, because they've created their emotional distance from you. It's time for radical acceptance. So yeah, anyways, I'm going to call it a night because your boy needs to sleep and get ready for the next day of work. It's been a pleasure as always. This live will be saved for everyone who wants to take a look at it. Again, you want to work with my team, feel free to click the link on my bio. I'm still working through my wait list and also working through a few other things too to obviously communicate with others as well too. It's been a pleasure as always. I hope everyone has a wonderful day wherever they may be, and I really appreciate all the love and support you've continuously shared with this page, and I will start pumping out more content as I am at the moment, just to try and work on a few things that I've got coming up. But other than that though, it's been a pleasure as always. Take care everyone.